So I've been preparing my whole life for this moment in time. But the truth is, we've all been preparing for this moment right now, here at this time. We always are. My current moment is happening in North San Diego County. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. And I wanted to acknowledge that this land has nourished and healed, protected and embraced the Kumeyaay for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. I would like us all right now to pause for a moment and sink the roots of who we are into the land where you are now sitting. Acknowledge the generations of people who have lived in relationship with this land and who perhaps left you blessings you will never fully know. I find inspiration from this land, the hills, plants, animals, the numerous butterflies that have been migrating lately, the land of the Kumeyaay that's here, as I set forth to talk to you today about the small topic of practicing radical inclusivity through staying awake to the spirit of love and kindness within each of us. I want to say that as I stand here, I'm accompanied by my ancestors, some of whom were Spanish, probably conquerors. I know one was a priest, which is about half of me, but the other half of me are native people, indigenous to this land, who have been in northern Mexico, and probably parts of California, traveling for thousands of years. That's what it means to be Mexican, a little mixed of both. And I have both on both sides of my family. My grandparents or their families came here during the revolutions in Mexico. And my parents were born here and I was born here. And for those who wonder, because when we greet each other as Latinos, we often say, what is your last name? What families are you from? So you see Estrada, but there's also Villalobos and Martinez and Carreño. Those are my 4 grandparents. So I want to acknowledge them as I set forth, as I'm sure that they are nearby. So I'm grateful, friends, that you're here with me today. And I will admit that every time I consider giving this ministry, I imagine myself being under the white tent in Walker Creek, and all of you are sitting in front of me, and the elders are sitting behind me. This image continues with me, even though I am quite aware that I'm speaking with you through Zoom. And those sitting on the facing bench can only be found by looking at their names next to their Zoom pictures. So I ask you to close your eyes for a moment and go with me there. The wind is blowing gently, and the flap on the left of the tent won't quite stay closed. There are a few people coming in late in the back, and a gentle sound of someone pulling out some knitting needles is near you. You look around. You see faces that are familiar to you and some that are new. Now, if you can indulge me just a bit more, I want you to consider how your body feels at this moment. Do you feel tension anywhere? As you sit waiting to hear what I could possibly have to say about radical inclusivity? Breathe for a moment. We all deserve to breathe. Just noticing the body's response to the words radical inclusivity. If there is any tension in your body, thank it. Thank it. It's trying to protect you. And then release it. If you want, you can even wiggle a little with your eyes closed if you want, to move the tension around and maybe dislodge it from its stuck spots. Does that feel silly? That's good if it does, because silliness is very good for us, for our souls and for our bodies. Okay, when your body finds stillness again, please take a big belly breath from your lower abdomen. This is the place from which we breathe when we are safe. Take another deep breath from below to see how your body and mind feels, to know that in this one moment right now, you're safe. Now feel free to open your eyes, or you can keep them closed if you want to. You can take a deep breath again if you want. And let me read to you a story that I used to read to my children. Let's see. Andrea, you're going to need to give me sharing screen permission.
Yes, ma'am. One moment. You should now have the ability.
So this is the story of the woman who outshone the sun. And it's the story of Lucia. And I've taken pictures of the pictures so you can see them. The day Lucia Centeno arrived, everyone in the village was astonished. No one knew where she came from, yet they all saw that she was amazingly beautiful, and that she brought thousands of dancing butterflies and brightly colored flowers on her skirt. She walked softly, yet with quiet dignity, her long unbraided hair flowing behind her. A loyal iguana walked by her side. No one knew who she was, but they did know that nothing shone as brightly as Lucia Centeno. Some people said that Lucia Centeno outshone the sun. Others said that her glorious hair seemed to block out the light. Everyone felt a little afraid of someone so wonderful and yet so strange. There used to be a river that ran by the town, almost the same river that runs by there now, and people said that Lucia Centeno went there to bathe. The river fell in love with her. The water rose from its bed and began to flow through her shining black hair. When Lucia finished bathing, she would sit by the river and comb out her hair with a comb made from wood of the mesquite tree. And when she did, the water, the fishes, and the otters would flow out of her hair and return to the river once more. The old people of the village said that although Lucia was different from them, she would be honored and treated. She should be honored and treated with respect. She understood the ways of nature, they said. But some people did not listen to the elders. They were afraid of Lucia's powers, which they did not understand. And so they refused to answer Lucia's greetings or offer their friendship. They called her cruel names and spied on her day and night. Lucia did not return the meanness of the people. She kept to herself and continued to walk with her head held high. Her quiet dignity angered some of the people. They whispered that Lucia must be trying to harm them. And people became more afraid of Lucia, and so they treated her more cruelly. Finally, they drove her from the village. Lucia went down to the river one last time to say goodbye, and as always, the water rose to greet her and began to flow through her glorious hair. But this time, when she tried to comb the river out of her hair, the river would not leave her. And so, when Lucia Centeno left the village, the river and the fishes and the otters went with her, leaving only a dry, winding riverbed, a serpent of sand where the water had been. Everyone saw that Lucia Centeno was leaving and that the river, the fishes, and the otters were leaving with her. The people were filled with despair. They had never imagined that their beautiful river would ever leave them, no matter what they did. Where once there had been green trees and cool breezes, now no more rain fell, no birds sang, no otters played. The people and their families suffered from thirst. People began to understand, as never before, how much the river, the fishes, the otters, even the trees and birds had meant to the village. They began to understand how much the river had loved Lucia Centeno. The elders said that everyone must search for Lucia and beg her forgiveness. Some people did not want to go. They were too afraid. But when the drought continued, everyone finally agreed to follow the elders' advice, and so the whole village set out in search of Lucia. After many days of walking, the people found the iguana cave where Lucia had gone to seek refuge. Lucia was waiting for them, but they could not see her face. She had turned her back to the people. At first, no one dared say a word. Then 2 children called out, "Lucia, we have come to ask your forgiveness. Please have mercy on us and return our river." Lucia Centeno turned and looked at the people. She saw their frightened, tired faces, and she felt compassion for them. At last she spoke. "I will ask the river to return to you," she said, "but just as the river gives water to all who are thirsty, no matter who they are, So you must learn to treat everyone with kindness, even those who seem different from you. The people remembered how they had treated Lucia, and they hung their heads in shame. Seeing that the people were truly sorry for what they had done, Lucia returned with them to the village and began to comb out her hair. She combed out the water, she combed out the fishes, she combed out the otters, and she kept on combing until the river had returned once more to where it belonged. The people were overjoyed to have their river again. They poured water over themselves and over their animals. They jumped into the river and they laughed and cried with happiness. In all the excitement, no one noticed at first that Lucia had disappeared again. When the children asked the elders where she had gone, the elders replied that Lucia had not really left them. Though they would not be able to see her, she would always be there, guiding and protecting them, helping them to live with love and understanding in their hearts. The story of the woman who outshone the sun teaches me so much about relationships between people, relationships between people and nature, relationships between people and the mystical. You hear about how fear is walking in their lives, how it is influencing their lives. In this story, fear enters early. The people, not the old or the young, but the people, didn't know Lucia. She was perceived as different from everyone, and everyone felt a little afraid. The people were afraid of what they did not understand, even though the elders said she should be honored and respected. But the people turned away and shunned her because she was different from them and feared that she would harm them. And so, us and them is born. This happens all the time, of course, not just in this story. It happens in our Quaker community. There are people we want to serve on committee with and those we do not. There are those who, when they rise to speak, our bodies get a little tighter, anticipating their words. I just want to be clear that us and theming are what is described as in-group, out-group cognitive bias in social psychology literature is something that can happen everywhere, even in our spiritual community. This is normal and it's automatic, really. We want to protect ourselves, and thousands of years have shown us that being able to discern who is safe and who is not safe, even if it's occasionally incorrect, is essential to survival. Our brain's automatic way of being is to scan and determine if we are safe. And for those of us who are unsure how people will treat us or are in a novel situation, an environment, we scan even more. When our senses of safety depends on the world and not our spirit, the environment matters a lot. What this means is that if our sense of safety doesn't come from our connection to spirit, then we try to move our environment to make us feel safe. Going back to the story, let's visit that moment when they finally drove Lucia from the village. To me, this is a perfect illustration of how fear becomes domination over another. The word dominant comes from the Latin stem dominare, to rule, have dominion over, and can be understood as a behavior or system that uses power to bend others to our will, even if it means harming them, killing them. And this is what happened. Out of fear, the people act to make their will occur. They treat her cruelly and finally drive her from the village. The easy thing to do here is to make a judgment that these people are simply out of order and that domination is wrong or evil or definitely them, not me. I feel this when I see the news that ICE is training citizens to round up immigrants for them. Or when I look at yesterday's news, which stated that in the United States, Latino and African American residents are 3 times as likely to become infected by the coronavirus as white residents, and nearly twice as likely to die. But is that really true, that domination is the expression of all evil? Going back to social psychology, it seems reasonable to ask, why do we seek domination over anything? And the simple answer is that in some cases, it increases our ability to survive, because sometimes bending the world to our desired will can be helpful. We do it all the time when we make things happen to bring ourselves food and shelter and relationships. Because of this, our brains connect having our own way to being more safe. And when we don't get our own way, there is a moment, sometimes fleeting, sometimes lingering, where we feel vulnerable and, yes, fearful. I want to offer a simple belief here. A belief meaning a place where I rest my heart. That is central to all that I have to say going forward. Our social systems mirror our inner systems for survival. I'll say that again. Our social systems mirror our inner systems for survival. And in the case of the United States, it mirrors the inner systems of survival of white, landed men who sought to protect themselves at the expense of other people and the health of the planet. This isn't a kind way of being, it is selfish. And for some of us not raised with this value system, that it's okay to sacrifice others for our own financial security, the trade seems insane. And so do the systems that perpetuate it. The culture of domination, which has also been written about as white supremacy or as the result of colonized mindset, asserts that it is okay to exploit others and the land in order to assure personal security through wealth. This culture of domination is everywhere, and the anti-racist movement is a direct call out of this unhealthy, hurtful, and perpetual acts of domination that occur every day in order for the rich to stay rich. We see it in our institutions. In simple terms, the creation of law enforcement in America was designed to protect white wealth at the expense of Black people. The military is used to control Native people's lands, as well as suppress brown and Black people throughout the world. Our economic systems rest on the exploitation of Latino laborers and workers, as well as the gifts of our earth. This state of affairs is not historical. As many of you already know, many of you work in this. Physical and systemic domination is occurring day in and day out for all of us. And some of us are suffering and some of us are prospering in this world. Charles M. Blow, an African-American columnist for the New York Times, writes, "It took centuries for America to hone its instruments of oppression. Every time part of it fell, it simply reemerged in a more elegant form." If you doubt this and want to learn more about how this happens, I highly recommend reading or listening to the New York Times 1619 series. It's startling and sad. Well, it is easy here to create an us-them dichotomy, as the people did when they separated themselves from Lucia. I ask you to step with me to a different place in our minds, a place where things connect, where domination and oppression are not just out there in the world, but also in our own community. Because yes, everything is interconnected. In some ways, Quakers have a very checkered relationship with domination and dominating culture. There are times when Quakers have chosen equality over domination. For instance, when men chose not to tip their hats at people with higher status, or they chose to use thee and thou to convey that we're all equal in God's eyes. White women were considered equals and given ministry, and the commitment to being pacifists could be understood as a stance against domination. There are also stories we tell about Quakers walking towards people who were different from them, such as the story of when Woolman went to visit the Indians, writing, quote, "Love was the first motion, and thence a concern arose to spend some time with the Indians, that I might feel and understand their life and the spirit they live in. If aptly I might receive some instruction from them, or they might be in any degree helped forward by my following the leadings of truth among them," unquote. And we can read about he, even when feeling trepidation, ministered to abolish slavery nearly 100 years before Black people were recognized as human rather than property. But as Vanessa July's book, Fit for Freedom, Not for Friendship, asks us to recognize, Quakers are complicated. Let's just take one example here. William Penn converted to Quakerism while still living in England and went to jail for his beliefs. He was considered to be a spiritually awake person, writing such beautiful words as, "I expect to pass through life once but once. If therefore there be any kindness I can show, or any good thing I can do, any fellow being, let me do it now, and not defer or neglect it, as I shall not pass this way again." And the well-known words, "Try what love will do." He seemed to be living in the light, or at least seeking such a way of living. And yet, he was actively engaged in slave ownership and trade. Penn's agent, Philip Lehman, used the ship, the Isabella, to trade human beings, slaves. In 1683, Penn himself was actually dealing in the buying of a number of Black people with Captain Nathaniel Allen. Penn was also selling people. Exactly how many slaves worked at the Pennsbury mansion and plantation belonging to William Penn is not even clear. In hindsight, I find myself wondering if he truly was seeking the spirit, if he could be causing so many other people so much pain. I want to believe that those seeking God don't hurt others for personal gain, that they have the classic mystical samadhi experience of feeling connected to everything, and because of that would not want to hurt anyone or anything because it would hurt themselves. Quakers writing in defense of Penn describe how he tried to be in good relationships with the Native people and referred to Black slaves as servants. But he did not give Black people their freedom, nor did he return land to Native people. He was living the doctrine of discovery, which more accurately could be called the doctrine of dominance and exploitation, a system that was driven by fear of losing power and wealth, and which inflicted fear on millions. I bring up William Penn to point out how a person seeking the life of spirit is not going to do the right thing 100% of the time. That we humans and the institutional systems we create are complicated. You see, systems repeat themselves. What is in us repeats in our communities and in our social structures. For this reason, Quaker meetings of all sizes have struggled to push back systems of domination and oppression, while at the same time preserving practices that perpetuate it, as was noted in our worship earlier today. We know this because friends do not always experience respect, kindness, or love in our meetings, committees, or community gatherings. And I want to note that people of color are a group with different levels of wounding and different needs with regards to calling out painful expressions of white supremacy, racism, and prejudice within our society of friends. People of color experience racial weathering, with those having accents or darker shades of skin experiencing stressors associated with being a person of color that differ from those of us who can pass. This is to say that people of color are not monolithic. We differ in our histories and in our experiences of oppression and the gifts of our cultures. We differ in our ideas of what will make us feel safe and interconnected and a part of this community too. So, as if that is not enough, now let me introduce another level of interconnection, which is that domination is not only in the larger institutional systems of our nation or in Quaker meetings, but also in me. Evidence of my internalization of the dominating culture occurs every time I seek to fulfill my own will in a way that does not respect the dignity of other people. It occurs every time I am more centered on being right than being kind. It occurs every time I protect my ego at the expense of another person's dignity. Domination is subtle sometimes too, occurring when I use my Harvard-trained skills to exude intellectual superiority in order to silence another or listen only to refute their views, as I was taught at Harvard. Really, whenever I am trying to manipulate others to my will, whether it is to make them agree with me or do what I want, this is domination working through me, not spirit. And in other ways, I am simply blind to my own complicity in propelling domination. Now, you may notice that many Quaker practices aim to provide an alternative to domination. When I am being an ideal Quaker, I am listening to spirit. Ego is gone, and my will is God's will. I am not attached to overpowering. I state the words and then let them go, as I hope I do today. Seasoning and discernment come forth to help me move from a centered place. I get this, but I am not convinced that I am always living up to what I know I can be when grounded in spirit. So I've strayed a little bit from the story, but I'm going to come back to it right now. One of the interesting elements of the story, to me, is that people believe that they are separated from Lucia, and so they can protect themselves by casting her away at no cost to themselves. That's what they believe. They believe the relationship with her is not only expendable, but possibly dangerous. But of course they're wrong. They don't see the connections that exist until the river, the fishes, the otters go with her. And when I think of the river as a metaphor for a flow of spirit, the story says something significant. It says that in using their power to separate Lucia from their community, they unexpectedly lose access to the flow of spirit. Domination, which requires a consciousness that I am separate from you, therefore I can manipulate you and hurt you, not only deprives the oppressed freedom, but costs the oppressor the fruits of connection to the spirit and the life of the river. And that's not true of just everyone out there, it's true of me too. I believe that domination is hard on our souls, on our psyches, and even our bodies, because it is antithetical to the truth. Physics, chemistry, biology, psychology are all showing more and more that systems are interconnected and relate to each other. As Sherry Mitchell, a native scholar, so insightfully states, the tendency to compare, critique, and condemn is epidemic within the mainstream society. We've forgotten that we are them and they are us, and when we suffer, we all suffer. Okay, I've given you a lot of information up to this point, so I thought we should stop for a moment and I would lead you through a little exercise so you can take a little break because it's a lot to absorb. Okay, so how are your bodies feeling right now? Do you feel tight? Do you feel like you're all in your head? You're ready for this to end? Do you feel tightness in your shoulders? You can move them around. Loosen up if you want to. Take a deep breath. Check in to where you are. Okay, I want you for a moment to think about something that you judge as really wrong. An action or something that somebody does that you judge as very wrong. It could be something you saw on the news this morning or something you heard in worship or something that really causes you to want to dominate back. Something that makes you want to stop them right where they are, where you don't feel compassion, you feel like you want to assert power and change the way they are. Now I'm going to ask you something that is not easy to do, but I believe we're capable of it. I want you to think about how you carry that quality in yourself. And I want you to forgive yourself for being that way. Perhaps it's a leader who lies, then forgive yourself for the times you've lied. Perhaps it's somebody who has been violent. Forgive yourself for the time you were violent. Perhaps it's somebody who disrespected you. Forgive yourself for the time you disrespected someone else. Now I want you to consider your own connections to people who you love or who love you, or if you have deep connections to trees and mountains and trees, you can think about those. You can think about how much you love them and how much they love you. And feel the sweetness of that. Now check back in with your body. How is it feeling? Take a deep breath. Let it go. All right. Thank you for following me on that. I will tell you that activity of forgiving myself for the things that I am least tolerant in somebody else energetically does something strange. It helps us to release something. It's helped me, at least. It helps me to release something. And it's harder for me to move from ego when I do that. It moves me back into spirit. So I don't know if it does that for others, but I thought I would share it with you as a practice that has been helpful for me when I feel really stuck. So I now want to make a little turn towards this concept of radical inclusion. We can wake up to connection in our life, and it happens in the story too. The people in the story wake up to the interconnection that exists when they start to understand that the way that they love the river is the way that the river loves Lucia. In short, love shows them the way. Guided by elders and led by the children, they finally set aside their fears and go to Lucia. Lucia does not engage with them. She turns her back to them. But then the children speak, and she turns and she looks at the people. She really looks at them and has compassion for them. And then she teaches them, right? She says, just as the river gives water to all who thirst, no matter who they are, so you must learn to treat everyone with kindness, even those who are different from you. And when she saw their sincere shame and remorse, she returns the river to them and forgives them. Reconnected, the people are happy, and Lucia in spirit stays with them forevermore. I often think if this story was written with the dominant culture and this kind of judicial way in which we resolve conflicts, she would have sent the people who sent her away too. That would have been the retribution, right? Just to send them off, because that's what they did to her. But she didn't do that. She had compassion. She had compassion for them. And I can't help but feel that that is a higher way to continue to love and to find connection and to restore connection when things have gone off. So I would read this story to adults sometimes when I was lecturing on my research on forgiveness. So I did my dissertation on forgiveness. I was interested in interethnic conflict, and I was interested in how forgiveness played into how people who had years and years of violence and war, how they forgive each other after that. I did that work because I wanted to understand, how do we love each other even while we're imperfect, even as we're trying, even as we risk losing connection, and and how we live in relationship with each other when it is so very, very messy. We walk into every encounter influenced by our ancestors, our families of origin in which we grew up, impacted by the dominant culture that's laced with racism and domination, and by our other cultures, if we have them, if it's not the dominated culture. These influence us and feed into the story we tell about ourselves and who we are really. Many people of color are actually mixed. Somebody said that earlier today. I said earlier, I'm equal parts Spanish and native from Mexico. Most African Americans are of mixed descent of African and European in the United States. I would guess many of you who think you are white or pink are not entirely that. Many of us who are mixed race have both the conqueror and conquered within us. We have the raped and the rapist in us. And those in this room who are mostly European descent are mostly have ancestors who are traumatized or traumatizers. Resmaa Menakem, in My Grandmother's Hands, writes about this more completely and walks the reader through ways to heal racial trauma to Black, white, and blue bodies. He contends that of the most powerful things we can do to heal our traumas, that one of the most powerful things we can do is heal our traumas. Forgive when we can, and mend the brokenness inside of ourselves. As we become more whole, as we do these things, so will our relationships with each other, and perhaps even our larger community will benefit. It is the way to become a good ancestor to those who are here now and are yet to come, to stop the cycles of fear and domination that are not only in our social systems, but in us. And it is deep spiritual work. I have no doubt that this healing of trauma is the work of our souls perfecting itself in some way. That if we don't deal with our traumas, we will not grow. And it is the way towards a beloved community, which Reverend Janet Robertson Duggins describes as people who believe deeply that they are loved by God and that everyone around them is loved by God too. People who believe this deeply enough that it shapes who they are and how they live their lives and how they deal with their own and each other's brokenness. I add to this that the beloved community occurs when people feel safe, they feel loved, and there is place for healing, a healing container for all of us that is equally experienced by everyone, regardless of what our identity might be. To create this involves more than just good intentions. I want to share with you some words that were written by Javon Fernandez to Pacific Yearly Meetings several months ago that I think speaks to this and her thoughts on what radical inclusivity may mean for us. The best biblical story, this is her writing, the best biblical story I think about when I hear radical inclusivity is the story of the rich young ruler and Jesus. It appears in Gospel of Matthew 19, 16 through 30, the Gospel of Mark 10, 17 through 31, and the Gospel of Luke 18, 18 through 30. If you don't know it, here is my interp. A man meets Jesus and friends and says, "Oh, hey, good Jesus." And Jesus responds, "Only God is good. How can I help you?" The man says, "So what do I need to do to enter the kingdom of God or to know God fully?" Jesus says, "Well, you know, the basics, right? The commandments?" "Oh, I've kept those from a child." Then the kicker. "Well then," says Jesus, "to be perfect or even radical," her words, "sell your stuff and give your possessions to the poor and follow me." Then the ruler went away sad because he was like Jeff Bezos, Kanye West rich. All my life I have been taught this story is about the rich. In the last 10 years, however, I can see that it is about that one thing that is keeping us all from knowing God. And for my atheist agnostic friends, being in communication with love and humanity. The topic of the story is about that one huge sacrifice that one or an institution has to make for that connection to happen. For the ruler, it was economic power. In the context here, meaning PYM, it is social supremacy. For another, it may be something else. Reading a slew of books is great. Having an intellectual awareness of white supremacy in institutions will undoubtedly deem you woke. But will you be lit, on fire, to implement a radically inclusive invitation to not join, but run PYM? What is okay, I'm back, one thing that may be keeping us from doing so? Love, Javon Fernandez. A powerful piece of ministry there, I think. And when I hear her prophetic words, what I hear is that if we really want to be radically inclusive, we will have to surrender and let go of what is precious to us. Perhaps it is power, perhaps things that make us comfortable, that make us feel safe in this world. In my life, I have found that to do this requires a deepening of faith in spirit. Trusting a love greater than myself will guide me forward even when I can't see how things will unfold, but trusting over and over again as I step into the unknown. In a way, that is what the people in the story had to do. They had to concede power to Lucia, make space for love to flow, and let go of controlling everything. And the gift was greater knowledge of how all things interconnect, including how their lives were connected to nature, the mystical, and each other. In some ways, we are learning the same lesson now. The myth of independence is being shattered by COVID-19, the Black Lives Matter movement, the climate disruptions. They're all telling us that we are connected, we are interconnected. And care, not domination, love, not force, are deeply, deeply needed if we are to survive. What one group does impacts the groups. What one person does impacts people. What one species does impacts ecosystems and the health of the planet. We have an opportunity now to live into this truth and heal our nations, our communities, and ourselves. And even as this happens, I remember the words of Thomas R. Kelly, whom Carl and I have been reading regularly in the morning, and is excellent. I recommend it if you haven't read it. He says, "Nothing matters and everything matters." The mystic truth to remind us to stay centered in spirit and not become so attached to our own will in solving any of these problems. So how are you all doing? I realize I've been talking for a while now, but I have one last section to share with you. And this is about staying awake to spirit, to the spirit of love and kindness. My great Aunt Tina once put my hand beneath hers. She always used to do this. She'd put my hand right in between my hands. And she said to me, "Mija," which means my daughter, but you get called Mija by everybody because you're the daughter to everybody in your family. "Be careful who you are while you are young, because you will become more of it when you are old." I knew what she meant. My Aunt Tina was saintly in her spirit. She was connected to spirit. Her energy exuded love. And when you're around her, even if she wasn't talking, you felt calm and at peace around her. She just vibrated this beautiful, loving energy. I had other aunts who leaned towards worry and judgment and controlling others. I had a lot of great aunts, all of which have died now. And they did indeed become more of this as they grew older. Some more worried, some more judgmental, some more controlling. While these words were said to me over 20 years ago, I think of them often, especially as I passed the half-century mark a couple years ago. Who do I want to be, and what do I do now to become more of this? My memory of her often guides me as I reach towards being the type of person who radiates love, God's love, into the world. Being a force of kindness and healing, not just by what I do, but by who I am. I believe most, if not all of you listening today, seek this too, that we seek to be connected to the presence. Being a society of friends who are truly, truly friends. And perhaps even being able to model this into the world. How do we do this with intention? I don't think there's any shortcuts. I'll tell you that. So I'm going to give you three ways in which I try to move towards this. And believe me, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but I have found that these have been helpful, and maybe they'll be helpful to us as we try to move towards being a more radically inclusive community. One is having deep connection to spirit daily. Let us resolve to do our best each day to listen to God, Spirit, the light, to place our will and belief, rest our heart in spirit. Diamata writes, "For faith to become strong, one has to keep on practicing it every day of our life." And she adds, "Chronic worry, fear, nervous tensions, close off the channels through which wisdom and healing flow from the deepest levels of consciousness." In preparing for this talk, I read many, many writings from many different mystics from many different traditions. And I was amazed to see how much similarity there were in what they advise for how to stay connected to spirit. They all lean towards having a daily practice of worship or meditation or contemplation or prayer or some way of connecting to spirit every single day. I've been meditating for over 22 years now, and I can testify that it has changed my life such that I feel connected to spirit more than I do not. That was not true when I first started. It also has contributed to healing me in ways I thought impossible. It has revealed to me traumas I did not know I had, pains that I did not know were there. In having a relationship with spirit, I will grow. I have grown, and I continue to grow. And believe me, I know I'm not anywhere near perfection at this point, but it unveils and unveils with us if we stay connected to spirit. The things, the blocks that keep us from being connected to spirit become clearer for us, and then we are given ways to remove them. In addition to daily practice, finding ways to connect when we get disconnected during the day is so very important. So you can have these deep moments when you spend time, like I usually try and do the Ben Lomond Quaker Center worship in the morning at 7:30 for a half hour. I know many people on here do that. So that's kind of my deep dive into spirit. But then when you're going through your day and something happens, somebody says something that feels offensive, or you hear the news, or something happens that kind of knocks you off and moves you towards that kind of place of fear and domination, it really helps to have a practice that pulls you back to spirit. For me, the first thing is to be awake to it happening, to acknowledge that, oh gosh, I just got knocked. And then I try to affirm for myself and remind myself that I'm safe. Because remember, right at the beginning of this talk, I said that when we don't get our own way and something kind of pushes against us, we might feel a little fear, like we're not safe anymore because this person doesn't like us, or is angry with us, or is trying to take space that's ours. So I remind myself that I'm safe. And then from that place, I try to connect to spirit and ask, what do I do next? How do I respond to this? And then, as authentically as I can, I try to do what spirit has told me and move with love and compassion and respect. We don't always have time to do all of that, but believe me, you can do it pretty quickly. And one time that really stands out of my mind when I did this was I was out with my children. I have 3 boys who are now 25 and 22 and 17. But when they were small, I was out somewhere with them, and anybody who has kids will understand this. They were all going in different directions. They weren't listening. They were just not minding, and I felt like I couldn't do it anymore. I felt like I can't do this. It's just too much. And so I closed my eyes right there in the middle of the shopping center, and I asked spirit, I'm like, I can't do this. What do I do? And this voice, as clear as day, came out, said, it's all for you. It's all for you. And I opened my eyes and I saw it. It was all for me. And I started laughing because I could see that here it was, all this stuff things were going all different directions. And really it was for me to see, can you find spirit in this moment? Can you find spirit in the middle of the pain or the struggle or the frustration or whatever it is? Can you find spirit right here? Because it is here. And I'm here giving you these opportunities to find spirit everywhere, even in the things that are uncomfortable and the things that don't feel comfortable to us. So this is a way to connect, to stay awake. You may have other ways. And actually, if you have other ways, you can put them in the chat, and maybe we can share what we do to stay connected to spirit through the day. So, but I do think we have to do that because it helps us to stay awake, to stay alert, to stay present, stay in the presence. And that makes us more able to be radically inclusive, to be genuinely loving, and to move with compassion. It stops the automatic processes that I described at the beginning, in which we go they, them, and blame and judge, speeding through, not paying attention to the souls of those that are around us. It stops that process, and it creates within us behaviors that are less oppressive and hopefully more radically inclusive. Thomas R. Kelly describes this process of living into the present this way. For the religious person is forever bringing all affairs of the first level down into the light, holding them there in the presence, with a capital P, re-seeing them and the world of men, people, and things in a new and overturning way, and responding to them in spontaneous, incisive, and simple ways of love and faith. Bringing all affairs of the first level down into the light. That's what I'm talking about, is bringing it back to the light. And the last thing is focusing energy on what is loving and kind. So from the world of social psychology, we know that trying to change a habit of mind or practice by suppressing the thoughts or behaviors we don't want actually just primes those behaviors in our brains and makes it more accessible. So if you're talking about the negative all the time, the negative is primed. It's going to be there. And in some cases, we unconsciously will start going towards the thing we don't want because it's so prevalent in our brains. So the antidote to that is to move your mind towards what you want. Practice new mantras, new thoughts, new behaviors that you want to grow, and ignore what you want to get rid of. As those pieces grow that are good, that you want, that are life-giving, that are radically inclusive, it automatically starts to weaken those pathways that we don't want. Sherry Mitchell, who I quoted earlier, the Native American author of the book, oh gosh, I always forget what the name of the book is. I'll tell you later. She suggests this breakdown. It's really, I think it's really lovely. I've used it more recently. So it's the 10-10-80 rule. She says she spends 10% of her time looking at what needs to be changed. So she looks at the news, she sees what's happening in the world. 10% of her time is that. 10% of her time she uses holding back what she doesn't want, maybe doing activities that stop something from happening. But she spends 80% of her time creating the reality that she wants, that we all want. So that's one way to shift, is to really to put our energy and our minds and our bodies towards the things that we want. And there's power in that. So there's one more quote from Thomas Kelly that I want to share with you, which is the new freedom, oh no, not Thomas Kelly. This is Thomas Keating. He says, the new freedom is not control. It is freedom not to demand of life whatever we used to feel was essential for our particular idea of happiness. So in this Zoom room sit so many people who love and care for each other. I can see many faces right now that I love and care for. We sit here wanting to be a blessed community, and sometimes we are. But sometimes we also sit with people who have hurt us and who have misunderstood us, and at times perhaps oppressed us. This week, I will feel the blessed community at times, but I also might feel the dagger of someone who has chosen their own well-being over mine. But like Lucia, I pray I can be forgiving and not lose my dignity, regardless of others' attempt to dominate me. Or maybe it will be me, tired at the end of the day, who loses patience and seeks to fulfill my own will at the sake of another. And then it will be my turn to apologize, to affirm to my friend that they matter, and once again move towards love. People will continually not conform to mine or your ideas of what they should be. But I believe that in listening to Spirit, when we all listen to Spirit, we rise into something very beautiful. It's a stream of shared truth that belongs to something bigger than you or me. And Quaker Process is built on this, of us tapping into that shared stream, that shared river, and there finding our common ground. And when we realize we have made a decision that takes that stream away from us, as a community, we need to humbly acknowledge our error and allow grace and love to bring it back into our lives. I know this seemingly imperfect process can transform us with blessings and grace. It may be hard, it may be painful at times, it may be joyous, and it may be loving and wonderful. I have learned, really quite recently, that to struggle with another human being, to love them, and to be loved, even when you're imperfect, deepens relationships. It deepens us. And if we don't do that work together, it will not deepen, and our society of friends will not deepen. So every day, there is opportunity in our Quaker practice to deepen us spiritually. And if that is occurring, then I believe that the gifts of the Spirit will be more common and present in our interactions with each other. I believe that our traumas will begin to heal, and so will our conflicts with each other, even though we will continue to have conflicts. When our love is powerful and our power is loving, domination is no longer part of how we relate to each other. Perhaps in that holy place of being in the presence today, this week, and carrying it with us after, we can delight in the words written by Galatians 5:22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things, there is no law. If we live into this, I believe we will be living into a more radically inclusive way of being that has the power to transform us personally, our society of friends, and perhaps help us to be more of what the world needs right now. We have hard and easy, joyous and difficult, loving and sometimes frustrating work to do with one another. But don't ever think that you can sidestep the work that we have to do inside of ourselves. If you jump right to trying to fix the society without recognizing that the society is mirrored within ourselves, it's going to be very, very hard to change the world that we're in. I want to end with a poem that my brother sent to me. And I wasn't sure whether to share it or not, but I am going to. And it's because we're talking about shifting a dominant culture. And part of that dominating culture is a lot of dichotomies. It's good, it's bad, you know, it's this or it's that. But really, in Native cultures, some Native cultures, and Carl, my partner, he was doing the Bible studies on the tricksters. And what we saw in the trickster stories was that they were neither good or bad. They did bad things, they did good things, but this dichotomy that something is good or bad is not something that is important. What is important is it growing your soul? Where do you go? Where does your consciousness go when this thing comes to you? Do you turn towards spirit or do you turn towards your ego and your fears? So this is a poem about I Am Indian, which kind of reflects how there is no line. I am Indian because the white man named me thus when they arrived in this new land. I am Indian because I'm an heir of the white man when they arrived in the land governed by my grandparents. I am Indian because that is how the white men labeled me in order to crush me and discriminate against me. I am Indian because that is what the whites called us, all the people of this continent. I am Indian, and now this word fills me with pride, the word which yesterday the white men used to jeer us. I am Indian, and now it causes me no pain that they call me this because I know the historical error of the whites. I am Indian, and now I know that I have my own roots and my own thoughts. I am Indian, and now I know that I have my own face, my own look, and my own feelings. I am Indian, and now I know that I am truly Mexican because I speak the Mexican language, the language of my grandpa. I am Indian, and now my heart is happy because a new day is coming, a new dawn. I am Indian, and now I feel that this sadness will soon end. Again, my heart will be able to laugh and be stronger. I am Indian, and now I can contemplate the beauty of the dance and hear the music of the song. I am Indian, and now I can see and hear anew the elders. I am Indian, and now the earth returns to give me roots, our Mother Earth. I will give the citation in the notes on this so people can get that if they want. When I read this, what it tells me is that we are all capable of transformation. The stories that we're telling ourselves today about who we are and how we need to relate to each other and how we need to relate to the world, that these are flexible. And that if we open up to telling ourselves new stories, who really knows what is possible? Thank you, everyone. It has been a real honor to be the keynote this year. I feel very blessed to be here.
Thank you, Mika. We'll go back into worship for about 10 minutes.